I want to introduce Aaron Cooper. Aaron's been in Cordova for like 17 years now?
Something like that, yeah.
And before that, she was at, I'm going to space out the name of the lake. Mono Lake. Mono Lake. And then she came here, was with the Forest Service first, I think, in education, right? Or something.
Yeah, well, actually, it was first with, I worked for the Science Center, as everyone does. When they come to Cordova, or most everyone, where it starts off with the Science Center. There's a long list, right?
Yeah, and then she came over to the Forest Service and eventually went and got her master's at Oregon State University, did her master's work on beavers on the Delta, and then has been doing the Copper River Migratory Bird Initiative since 2001. So almost since it began. So she's going to tell us all about it.
Okay. Well, you know, I've been involved in varying degrees in the Copper River International Migratory Bird Initiative, and it started in 2001, as many excellent ideas do, in a bar with a couple people talking about conservation and the good work we do in the United States, but in reality, that needs to go further, and that migratory birds don't just rely on one spot. They rely on a whole network of sites. And so this, you know, this idea blossomed into what we know as we call CRIMBY.
Should we turn off the light?
Yeah, sure,
Is
go
that
ahead.
better for what you're doing?
Actually, I would prefer it.
And is there anybody
With
in Valdez?
lights or without?
Yes, I'd prefer it actually.
Muted, I think.
Okay.
Oh, is Valdez muted?
Oh, okay, then we have to let Valdez know. If anybody's, I guess it's first
No,
check.
I see no one.
Unmute them and just ask.
Well, it's yeah, I thought I just did. So
Anybody there?
No, it's still muted far. But maybe that's their doing. That's their doing, I guess.
maybe, yeah, maybe they have. It's. I can't undo it. So
Okay.
We'll just let them run.
okay. So the Copper River Delta is connected to the world, and that was kind of the premise of this talk. And so, yeah, well, I should say it's connected in the hemisphere, like you think of the world, but in fact, you know, if you think of how, you know, there's some birds on the Copper River Delta that actually go onto the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So there is a major connection here, and we'll talk about that today, the connection, how birds are connected, and how we've connected not only birds but people along the flyway. The Copper River Delta is about 700, depending on how you measure it, about 700,000 acres. And you include mudflats and barrier islands, a little bit of the Controller Bay area. And it's part of the Chugach National Forest, and it's the largest contiguous wetland on the Pacific coast of North America. And ironically enough, the Forest Service manages 3 incredibly large coastal wetlands in Alaska. And if they were anyplace else, they'd probably be the largest refuges. If they were down in the lower 48, they most likely would be the largest refuges in the U.S., in the continental U.S. So they're impressive in size and unique within the Forest Service. The Forest Service doesn't in the lower 48, manages more forested areas, hence the name, but in Alaska we have a much more wider variety of landscapes. And this landscape is made up of a matrix of freshwater ponds and sloughs and glacially fed rivers, as well as mudflats and barrier islands. And there's a lot of variety out there, and a lot of different habitat. And in this area, because of that variety, there's over 200 migratory species of migratory birds that use this area. And so we're counting, you know, songbirds and shorebirds, waterfowl, and you know, birds like cranes and I'm trying to think of any other genre of and hawks and falcons that migrate through this area. But one of the biggest show stealers are shorebirds, and we have up to 5 million shorebirds that use this area and migrate through the Copper River Delta. And because of this migration, we have the Copper River Delta Shorebird Festival, the oldest, the longest lived shorebird festival in the state of Alaska. And these birds connect us then. I talked earlier about how these birds connect us along the flyway. Some birds only migrate within, you know, they migrate short distances, such as trumpeter swans don't go very far. You know, they go down to here. But then you have birds such as the red-necked phalarope that go all the way down into the southern ends of Chile. So there's an impressive array of migratory birds and birds that use wetlands that use this area. So CRD, to connect these areas and to start thinking about conservation along the flyway, because if we conserve areas such as the Copper River Delta, which is managed primarily by the Forest Service, primarily for the conservation of fish and wildlife species, but other areas that these birds use aren't necessarily managed that way. And so we started with 6 charter members, and including Ducks Unlimited and different areas within the Forest Service, and Ducks Unlimited in both Canada and Mexico. And we quickly added folks that really wanted to join in the conservation of these migratory water birds, including the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, and then moving down, we included Pronatura in Mexico, which is a large conservation organization across Mexico. Calidris in Colombia, it's not on the list, but recently an official addition is Panama Audubon. Alaska Audubon was added, Bird Studies Canada, and then the National Park of Peru, which is Paracas specifically, and Aves y Conservación in Ecuador. So we have quite a few countries, and also WISRIN. And WISRIN is represented both in the United States and also Diego Luna, who is out of the southern coast. We've hit on areas such as the Tierra del Fuego and things like that. So we and places down further south that shorebirds such as red knots and I'm trying to think of the big one, pectoral sandpipers. You'd find wintering in areas that were
Can you tell people what WISRIN stands for?
Oh, Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. So that's a partner within here that within CRD.
What is Alaska region? What do you mean by Alaska
Okay,
region?
so there are some I retrofitted this presentation from a Forest Service presentation. And I think there's a little bit of more internal jargon here. So Alaska region would be Alaska region of the Forest Service. So it's good to point that out because I'll fix that.
It's the Tongass and Chugach National Forest.
Yeah. And the last meeting we had was in Colombia, and there were 8 countries represented at that meeting. And an impressive group of people talking about their projects and things that they had done, as well as the connections they made. And so to step back one moment and talk about what CRD does, it's really about joining. We're not a granting organization. One of our main focuses is to connect people and projects together for conservation.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm surprised nothing in Costa Rica is mentioned. They talk about conservation a lot.
It's not about necessarily that every place along the Pacific Flyway is represented in CRD. It's just, and partners come in and partners go out. It's just how we're working and the partnerships we've made currently for conservation. So there's lots of organizations such as WISRIN, Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network, that's a really big umbrella that covers everyone. And we are really more strategic in partnering with folks and on very specific projects. And so as I move on and talk about a mission and some of the projects we've worked on, you'll see that there's room for partners to come in. There's also partnerships made, not that somebody would leave necessarily, it's just that the focus of their organization may shift and move somewhere else and they may come back in. So I don't know if that makes any sense. But the mission statement here is to strengthen the conservation of the Copper River area's migratory bird resources, and doing that through international partnerships and then getting things done on the ground. And that's really, we're not, the big initiatives and overarching policies I think will help support, but our real goal is to get things done on the ground and connect people along the flyway. So we like to work with existing plans. So we're not out there to create big plans. We're helping to bolster capacity within these smaller organizations to work with existing plans. Also to strengthen knowledge base. What's known and what's not known. What habitats are these birds using? Is there some big gap in your knowledge that you need to figure out? And then building these partnerships for conservation, including both non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations. And then education. How are we spreading the word? How are we linking these ideas of conservation with the public and getting the word out about conservation, not only within the countries that are participating, but also across international boundaries. So why do we work with CRD? Because, and I've talked about this before, I'll just hit on this real briefly, but that if we make investments within the United States, those investments will mean nothing if we don't conserve internationally, because these birds are migratory and use habitats beyond country boundaries. And we can do this effectively through creating these international partnerships. Shorebirds specifically, and waterbirds, so CRD is about waterbird conservation, but shorebirds specifically face uncertain futures, and there's quite a few shorebirds that are species in decline. And that everyone likes birds. Just throw that one in there. So every year we work to collaboratively fund 7 to 9 projects within our organization. And it's not just governmental funding, we try to help build capacity to get grants and people bringing together these projects and pooling their dollars. So I'm going to talk about these 3 areas, maybe branch out a little bit along the flyway. And so talking about what we've done in the past and maybe the vision for the future in some of these areas to give you a clearer view of what CRD does and how it networks as an organization. So in Mexico, we'll start with Mexico. One of the big focuses, and it was our very first international partnership, was with Pronatura, Mexico. And the idea was to help them develop a shorebird conservation plan, help fund them, to develop links that between communities in Mexico that had natural resources and shorebirds that could be developed into conservation education opportunities such as shorebird festivals, and to link the mayor of that area with Cordova and to show them the importance and the benefits of having things like shorebird festivals. Looking at mangrove habitat restoration in Angostura in areas that used to be shrimp farms, and then looking at migratory birds and what habitats they're using, and once you identify those, then you can move forward in prioritizing, well, maybe we need to do some conservation work in these areas. So the Mexican Shorebird Conservation Plan was developed, and I'm not sure the year that it was finished, but once it was developed, so during the development, it was used to, they brought in both government and NGOs to develop the plan and identify areas within country that were priorities for shorebirds. And here is a map that highlights those areas, many of which I'm not sure if all of them are Wisman sites, but a majority I do believe are. I think the red is our Wisman sites. And some of the other ones may have become since this map was created. Marianne? No, okay. And so once this was, once they developed this plan, so give me a picture of how this all works. So you get together and you develop this plan, and people have their input into what they believe are important areas, and then you put the plan back out there for the government to use, and to prioritize areas within the country. So what are the important shorebird areas within the country, and what are the mangroves that are needed, what mangrove areas are needed for conservation in Mexico, and presenting to state and federal authorities. And you know, these aren't glamorous photos by any stretch of the imagination, but in a lot of times these are where conservation decisions are made. One of the exciting and fun things that happened along the way is this partnership between Angostura, Mexico, and Cordova. And the mayor of Angostura came to Mexico with a TV crew from Mexico, and there was 2 purposes there. to show him the benefits of conservation and shorebird festivals and how that would benefit his community by showing him our Shorebird Festival, as well as videotaping a program that would air across Mexico, focusing on Alaska and shorebirds. And so this is the mayor right there. Tim Joyce was our mayor at the time. This is the mayor of Angostura, and his nickname is Chanel, I do believe. And there they are signing this cooperative agreement to conserve shorebirds. And after this trip, the man, Kiko Vega, who works down in the Angostura area, he received, this goes a long way for conservation on the ground. Because this man right there, this mayor, then started showing real support for conservation within Angostura and within shorebird habitat. So building these connections helps conservation in the long run. And then this TV program, this TV crew, Reflectos Mexico, what's it called, Reflectos Sinaloa. It now is aired nationally, and I do believe this program is actually not just aired in Sinaloa, but across the nation of Mexico, focusing on their trip here in shorebird conservation and also Alaska, and the meaning of the connections between the two. And it was one of the more popular programs. Okay, so these guys say that's one of the more popular programs in Mexico. And you know, who are we to argue? One of the other things is so they developed this program within the schools, and a lot of these programs are very school-based. And so this is the third annual festival between the shorebirds and the children. You know, and the mothers get involved and create awesome outfits. Not necessarily shorebirds, but they're definitely cool. And you know, everybody, when you get the school children involved, everybody gets excited. And these festivals, these bird festivals, have not been a very big deal in a lot of Latin America, and they're becoming a much bigger deal. And people are capitalizing on the idea that birding festivals bring in dollars and also help with conservation. And so you'll see over the years, there's a lot more shorebird festivals and festivals that focus on birding being developed throughout Latin America. The Crimby assisted, this is one of the big Crimby projects, and it doesn't look like much and there's not much activity, but this mobile, Pronatura, this mobile classroom that they could take to these communities and teach environmental education. And so it's when you have events like that, it's this mobile team that makes it happen. And so we're going to move on to some of the shorebird surveys, or some of the work done in northwestern Mexico, and that's kind of an emerging stronghold of conservation within Mexico and a very strong team of partners. This is the Bay of Colorado, or Colorado River Delta, I should say, Bay of Colorado. And so much of the work has focused on monitoring shorebirds and wetlands in this area. And the southernmost extent of black oyster catchers is in these areas of northwest Mexico, as well as wintering shorebirds. And the status of that, I don't know if anybody knows about the water situation in the Colorado River Delta, but there's not much water that ends up there. And so there's a lot of conservation concerns in that area. And then looking at shorebirds that actually breed in that area, and nesting shorebirds. And there's a lot of, as we all know, that area of Mexico is a hot spot for vacationers and ATVers and things like that. So beach nesting shorebirds have a lot of challenges. So we're going to move on to Colombia, and that's one of our next partners that not necessarily along the flyway geographically, but kind of in a timeline sense. And they have done some amazing work in Colombia and really connecting, and one of their focuses is in Colidris, the organization, we focus on organizations and people who get projects done. And Colidris in Colombia really connects, one of their main goals is talking to communities and connecting with communities and conservation. So one of the big things they wanted to do was create a Wisdom site. And so looked at the capacity for how they would do that. And that was a project that we could work with on them, having already been involved, and there's a numerous number of Wisdom sites along within the Privy Partnership. And then this, Volcano de Esconde, is one of the most important mangrove sites on the Pacific side of Colombia, and it's that region itself has a lot of opportunity for conservation, and I'll talk more about that because that's a very interesting story on conservation and local community involvement. So, so one thing to understand that's not in this is the country of Colombia, which is pretty big, not as big as Brazil, but right about in here is where Panama comes into Colombia. It's an incredibly diverse country. So you have the Caribbean, the Pacific. Right there is this stretch right there touches the Amazon River and the Amazon Basin there, and then part of the Andes. And their claim to fame is the most bird species of any place in the world. And it's not hard to believe, also because Panama empties, Panama is this bridge between North America and South America. And so you get Panama emptying into Colombia, and you have this wide array of habitats. So it's a very exciting place. And within there is we have, the Caribbean coast for conservation, and some active indigenous tribes still live in this area. As well as this area here. When I said this Esconde area there, one story of Colombia is that when slaves gained their freedom within the country, they selected this area of land over on this side nobody was living there. And it is mangrove, swampy, hard scrap living. There was a reason why no one had selected this area. So a majority of the demography of this area are Afro-Colombians that live on this side of the country. And then you have quite a few indigenous groups here, and a wide variety of ethnic groups that make up the country of Colombia. But a lot of the conservation work, and I actually have a small film that was made about the conservation efforts in this area specifically, made by Ecology, that I can show if people are interested at the end. So starting with the Caribbean, one of the main focuses in this area is fishing, and especially even in the Pacific as well. So along these coastal areas, you have a lot of people making their living by fishing. And you can see these little villages all built up on stilts. And I was in Colombia a year and a half ago, and it was when the major rains hit and flooded. A lot of people heard about the flooding in Venezuela, but people had rivers running through their houses. Pigs were swimming around looking for a high spot to stand. So also not a very easy life and very easy living for these folks. And these dugout canoes, hand-thrown nets. And this is also areas where the shorebirds will hang out and overwinter. And this is on the Pacific side. And one of the big efforts that Calidris has made is to connect with, also through education and festivals, connecting to the local populations and through fun and having a party and celebrating the species that they live with and the importance of those species. And this right here, it's travelers without luggage. So migratory species, such as shorebirds, and this kid has drawn a little shorebird in the sand here, turtles and whales. And this is, you see this is a house on stilts here in the sandy area just outside the mangroves on the Pacific coast. But not only are they working on connecting with communities, but also on inventorying shorebirds and looking at the variety of species and habitats that use these areas. One of the great projects that they've worked on in Colombia has been collaborating with rice farmers, and how do we work with rice farmers on cultivation techniques that promote bird habitat. And I say it's exciting because the amount of acreage, you couldn't buy this acreage for conservation, but you're talking people into willingly conserving areas through management practices for conservation. And not only do you get to conserve, when you help these organizations in other countries, you're not only conserving water birds, there's a multicolored tanager. It's on the watch list internationally, endangered birds. So these folks can actually, you help them with the capacity for other birds as well that are conservationally important. They may not migrate to Alaska, but they are important. It's important to conserve a variety of habitats. And by building capacity in one area, you're helping them build capacity for their entire program.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
With people living a hard scramble life, as you described it, usually they're gonna, if they can shoot that and sell it for its feathers, somebody would.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a hard time understanding how they can even, pass up the opportunity to harvest whatever they can get away with for food and or for profit. Is that a problem?
Absolutely. I mean,
So getting to conserve is really difficult.
You're absolutely right. And how can and so when you work with them and talk and not just tell them that something is wrong, that you're not supposed to be doing that, but working with them collaboratively and helping them make decisions. There's always going to be folks that shoot birds. But in the past, if you think about history, wetlands in the past, we filled wetlands in. Wetlands weren't important. But as time went by, people learned that if you don't do that, you're going to have flooding in other areas. And so it's a matter of, over time, educating people to the importance of this, or to the importance of conservation. And yes, if you're living an existence that's hand to mouth, then in reality, some of this stuff will always occur because of the levels of poverty. But if you help improve their situation, that level of poverty hopefully will improve as well. And so this is the team that we work with down there. In fact, Carlos, we have an international biologist exchange, and Carlos actually gave a presentation. I know, Michelle, you saw the presentation he gave a few years at Shorebird.
It was excellent.
Yep. And so these guys and it's about connecting with these people, and about the people on the lawn, picking good organizations that do great work and collaborative work on the ground. And moving on to Panama, and here we have a mangrove warbler, which is the kind of the landmark or ambassador species of the mangroves down in Panama. And one of the things that is done quite frequently within Latin America called rare campaigns. And what they do is outreach to communities and get them engaged in conservation and feel as though they themselves as a community member have ownership. And so that was a big push within Panama, is to get that moving forward. Also, they teach there's a lot of classes in Panama on wetlands awareness and getting out into the mangroves. Panama is not a very big country. It's a skinny country with a lot of mangroves on both sides of the country. And there's a lot of pressure there to get rid of those mangroves and build. Construction, when we were going through our recession here, Panama was going gangbusters with building. And so there's a lot of construction going on in that country. And so building wisely and planning wisely for the future is an ongoing effort with our in-country partners, which are Panama, Audubon. And so one of the big focuses has been conserving the Bay of Panama, which is a Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network WSRN site. And it's a hemispheric site, so there's a lot of birds there. And this big push to show, and this is mangroves, and this is also the mangrove warbler, to show the value of mangroves. And that we want to conserve this area. And you can see, here it is, the Bay of Panama, and there's Panama City. So there's high rises right there, and there's a few mangroves. You can see mangroves there. We're standing right in front of a little bit of mangrove. So there's not many left. And those areas are in fact protecting the shoreline. So talking about protecting areas and using wetlands as a buffer between yourself and the elements is also a topic that is promoted in country. What a really neat project is integrating, and you'll see over and over again, we're not only working on scientific projects, we're integrating the science with the communities. Our partners are, I should say. And this girl here is working on banding Pronatura warblers within the mangroves during migration. Yeah, he has a little mangrove, a little warbler right in his hand there. And so these kids get to hold the birds and get to band them. And as Mary Ann has seen firsthand, that makes a huge impact on children. And so moving on to our partners, and these are our newest partners in Peru and Ecuador, and building capacity, and these are organizations, obviously Conservación and Paracas, the National Park in Paracas, Peru, building capacity in those sites and bringing communities together with their conservation efforts. And so this is a workshop for shorebird identification as well as banding and capture. Down, this is, I do believe, Ecuador. They've caught some sticks, apparently. And this is Paracas, and it's also called Poor Man's Galapagos, and Inca terns and Humboldt penguins, and I do believe this is a Peruvian pelican, as well as the migratory species such as western sandpipers and things like that. And so there's a lot of diversity in these areas. And then on to the island of Chiloé in Chile. And I said Peru and Ecuador, but I checked this one in at the last minute. And these are, who wants to guess what species this is? Something we have here. No. It's something that migrates to Chiloé.
Whimbrels?
It is whimbrels. Yep. And I think these are awesome. I love the knitted hats.
Yeah.
So this is another birding festival in Chiloé, and that they're really promoting. There's a lot of oil development in Chile, and in between Santiago and Chiloé, I do believe there's some major oil development. So in fact, WSRN gave one of the oil companies down there an award for best practices, I want to say, by integrating their work in with Diego Luna and some of his work. So there's a lot of really interesting things that can be done with big business and companies and communities. And one of the latest things are the Shorebird Surveys. And we are part of a larger network of folks all along the Pacific Flyway who are looking at the population of western sandpipers and Pacific dunlin. And the starting point has been doing winter surveys in Latin America. And they were workshops in Mexico and Colombia. And the Colombian workshops, I think they actually had multiple countries involved in Colombia. And they've been conducting counts this winter. And I do believe in 2013 or 14, they're going to start looking at integrating stopover sites in those protocols. It's developed by Point Reyes Bird Observatory, And these are, some of our citizen science and some of them are done just by professional biologists. But it's looking at over 10 years, what are the trends in shorebird numbers? Because that's one of the things that there's speculation that some species are in downward decline, and looking at, can we determine that through these surveys throughout the flyway. I'm not going to delve too much into it because I haven't been very involved, but just to show that this is also part of the larger network. And by conducting these surveys, looking at declines as well as what habitats are they using, what's important for these birds. And this is just this is our crew out of northwest Mexico, and that's Eduardo Palacios and the folks that actually surveyed those in that area. They had meetings and workshops, and then went out and surveyed, and people surveyed for most of December. And then moving up to Alaska. Alaska is also part of this, not just Latin America, but Alaska is also part of this, and most of the children in this image are out of college. I think they're all out of college at this point.
The teacher has been retired and now is back fishing.
Right, exactly. And developing birding classes in places such as Yakutat, which also has a very large wetland, and things that haven't occurred in the past before, but developing those programs. Also, creating an exchange between Latin America and the Copper River Delta through Biologist exchange. And we pointed out Carlos earlier, and Carlos is from Colombia and now is back in Colombia. And the idea is to foster partnerships, having people who are at the beginning of their careers come up here, work with us for a summer, and then go back down. And it creates a partnership between the two groups. We learn from them, they learn from us. And Carlos went up to the North Slope and worked with Rick Langtote on Shorebird Surveys, and took that information with him back to Colombia and found the first ever recorded nesting of a piping plover, I do believe, in Colombia. So it definitely pays off for everyone involved, and it's a great experience. We've also conducted research associated with universities such as Notre Dame and Loyola and Michigan State. And the idea is to look at the productivity of ponds on the Copper River Delta. And what does that mean for the species that use those areas? What does it mean for the future of the Copper River Delta? And those methods, we had one of our partners in Crimby asked for the methods for this to start looking at pond ecology work in Peru. And one of the big focuses, for birds in this project has been how do invertebrates and their emergence tie in with rusty blackbirds and that productivity in the Copper River Delta, a bird that really keys in to dragonflies. They eat primarily dragonfly, emerging dragonflies, and dragonfly nymphs. So that timing, if you were to have a warming period and the emergence were to come out sooner, how would that influence these birds? As one speculation. And how do we tie everything together? Well, one of the things we've done in the past has been a distance learning project where we focus on shorebirds and their migration along the flyway, and it's broadcast in English and Spanish throughout the United States, and then so you can watch it anywhere. And we speculated that this reached about 500,000 kids. And the next program, the Migration Science Industry, is the same thing. The last program was just for the Copper River Delta. This program had live broadcasts in Panama, Mexico, San Francisco Bay, Vancouver, and then the Copper River Delta. And the goal was to link these sites, and you can see the sites along there. But we wanted kids to become motivated to take action in their own backyard. our next program is going to be focused on the habitat. And that is going to start next fall, in 2012, in Vancouver. So we're going to have a live program in Vancouver on what is a wetland, then in Panama on how wetlands are connected, and then back to the Copper River Delta for how kids have created projects based on wetlands. And this is the end of my program, and one of the most heartwarming things is seeing this is the Crimpy logo carved out on a sign down in Colombia on a stretch of road between Santa Marta and a small village. And it's an area of conservation where they've worked hard and succeeded at conserving shoreline and habitat for migratory water birds. And seeing the success of our partners and the successes along the flyway really is what Crimby is all about and how it makes that program successful.